ESPN is the biggest sports network in the world today. How did it start? Where are they at now? And what's in store for its future? Let's talk about it.
This is SportsCenter.
ESPN is the biggest sports network in the world today. Their goal is to bring you 24-hour coverage of your favorite sports to anyone and everyone. No matter if you've been watching sports for one day or your entire life, whether you casually tune in from time to time or you're a heavily committed sports fan like myself, ESPN's main goal is to entertain you. ESPN covers the largest organizations from your favorite sports, such as the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, the MLB, the UFC, and Premier League soccer. A lot has changed with ESPN over the years, whether it be the job market, different ownerships, different coverages of different sports, certain deals and mergers that they've had. But before we can get into that, we first need to go back to the beginning and find out where it all started. In 1978, Bill Rasmussen and his son Scott Rasmussen were fired from their positions as communication managers for the New England Whalers hockey team. During their time here, they met a man named Ed Egan. Egan was extremely passionate about sports and heavily interested in a television career. He presented to them the idea of a monthly cable television network centered around the New England Whalers. Despite discouragement from his firing, Rasmussen thought this was a great idea, and he expanded that on to coverage of all Connecticut sports teams rather than just one. And thus, the idea for ESPN was born. Flash forward to 1979, ESPN strikes a deal with the Getty Oil Company. The deal involved ESPN giving 85% of its controlling interest to the Getty Oil Company in exchange for money and assets. This funding was enough for them to eventually start broadcasting in that same year, thus founding ESPN officially. The first broadcast had about 30,000 viewers, and there wasn't as much outreach considering that at the time the only people who could get access to it were people with cable. It was just about 1.4 to 1.6 million at the time. In 1980, both the Rasmussens and the Getty Oil Company began to clash heads. Bill was removed from his position as president of the company, while his son Scott was fired altogether due to conflict of interests. In 1981, Bill decided he no longer wanted to take part in ESPN, so he sold his remaining 15% share of the company to ABC. In 1984, ABC would go on to acquire the remaining 85% from the Getty Oil Company, thus acquiring 100% ownership of ESPN. In the same year, shortly after acquiring full ownership of ESPN, ABC decided to sell 20% of the company to Nabisco Brands. Nabisco would keep their 20% until 1990 when they sold their portion to current minority owner Hearst Communications. In 1995, Disney would buy out ABC and thus acquired the 80% portion that ABC originally owned in 1996. Things would remain this way until very recently. 2025 has been a big year for ESPN, with two major changes coming in the month of August. For starters, the NFL acquired 10% of ESPN from both Disney and the Hearst Communications in exchange for some of the NFL's assets as well as the NFL Network channel. This bumped down Hearst's stake to about 18% and Disney's stake to about 72%, with the other 10% going to the NFL. The second major change had to do with their deal with the UFC. Back in 2018, the UFC signed with ESPN as a distributor. ESPN would get all the rights to the UFC's pay-per-views and fight nights. In exchange, the UFC would get money from pay-per-view buys. This would mean that people would have to strictly be able to watch UFC only from ESPN, whether it be paying for the pay-per-view or paying for ESPN Plus to be able to watch the free fight night cards. This year their partnership ended and the UFC ended up signing with Paramount Plus for $7.3 billion. This is a big shakeup for ESPN as they're no longer going to have as many ESPN Plus subscribers and they're not going to make any revenue anymore from the pay-per-view buys. This is a huge change that can have major implications for the company down the road. ESPN has a bunch of different ways to make money through their different media distributions. For starters, they have the ESPN Deportes, they have ESPN 1, ESPN 2, and any single sport which has ESPN associated with it as well, such as NFL on ESPN or NBA on ESPN. They use all of these different distributors to make money off of ad revenue as well as purchases for subscriptions because certain ones require ESPN to access them. ESPN has three major ways of giving you their media. The first one is the original, which is cable television, a 24-hour network that runs all day and all night. When there's live sports on, it'll broadcast live sports. If not, it'll show highlights throughout the day so people can watch them. There's also ESPN Radio. And lastly, but definitely not least, the ESPN app, which is where people mostly consume ESPN. There you can watch different sports, you can watch replays of sports, you can watch live sports, you can watch talk shows. Some of it is free, some of it is not. It's on a subscription basis, but the app itself is free. Let's talk briefly about the ESPY Awards as well as the awards that ESPN themselves have won. The ESPY Awards is hosted by ESPN and is an award show dedicated to giving athletes of a given year specific shine, whether it be awarding them for the accomplishments that they made that year or rewarding them for specific highlights and moments that are iconic for that given year. In addition to their own award show, they've won a number of awards from different places. They've won 267 Sports Emmys Awards, which is by far the most of any organization, as well as 61 Cable/Ace Awards, winning those ones basically every single year since its foundation. What if you want to get a job at ESPN? How could you do that? Do they have internships and entry-level jobs? They absolutely do. For internships, it's constantly changing throughout the seasons. At the moment, they have stuff for finance, sports marketing, and even graphic design. They also have entry-level jobs that do constantly change as well on different recruiting apps like LinkedIn, ZipRecruiter, or Indeed, etc. ESPN is very good when it comes to getting new employees on because they have these opportunities. Having entry-level jobs and internships is very important when getting new people in, as it's not impossible to get into. And there you have it. That's ESPN for you. Now let's think about what's in store for the future for them. For starters, I will say personally that I do think that they are going to fall off just a little bit in money, as now they don't have the UFC anymore. Although the UFC as an organization isn't as big as the NFL or the NBA or the NHL, it's not as big as those companies. It's not worth as much money. But the reason ESPN Plus was invented in the first place back in 2018 was following the signing of the UFC for pay-per-views. As before, you had to get ESPN Plus to be able to watch fight night cards, or you'd have to pay money, which would go to both parties, for the pay-per-views. That's no longer the thing anymore, as it goes to Paramount Plus. I know me personally, I have ESPN Plus strictly for UFC, but now that that's not the case anymore, I might cancel my subscription. So for that reason, I do think they'll lose out on some money. However, ESPN will always be a major company as they have access to all these major brands and organizations like the NFL and the NHL and the NBA, especially after recently giving 10% to the NFL, kind of putting the two and intertwining them both. On top of the fact that their talk shows with hosts like Stephen A. Smith or Max Kellerman, keeping them afloat in terms of ratings and constant appearances, I think ESPN will be just fine in the long run. And although it might have a little bit of a steep decline, just a little bit over the next year or two, I think ESPN will prosper and still be a really good company a long time from now.